Whether you're just a budding 5-year-old or an adult pushing your 40s, the name Sonic the Hedgehog is instantly recognizable. 2026 marks 35 years of the blue blur headlining multiple video game entries, movies, television shows, comic books, crossovers, playsets, and Happy Meals, just to name a few. Sonic has been so prolific throughout pop culture, it's almost hard to believe his simple beginnings. Strap on those shoes and hold onto your rings. This is Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis. But before we head down memory lane, a Sonic Speed shout out to this video sponsor, Techries. They're your one-stop place for all things tech and gaming news. Plus, they host live shows every Sunday on YouTube and Twitch. Follow the link on screen and in the description to check out their page, and be sure to drop a follow so you don't miss out. In the late 80s, Nintendo was dominating the home console market, and a lot of that could be attributed to the mass appeal of their mascot, Mario. While Sega was having some success with their arcade ports on the Master System, along with the newly released Mega Drive, aka the Sega Genesis here in North America, they still wanted to secure a stronger foothold in the market. So, the most obvious course of action was to create a Mario killer. They literally codenamed the project as Defeat Mario. By November 1989, development on the project was underway. Sega wanted to focus on speed as the core concept of the new game. And while the gameplay was moving in the right direction, they felt the characters were not. And thus, an internal design competition was held in 1990, where designer Naoto Oshima presented his drawing of a rotund blue hedgehog in red sneakers. The character itself, along with his ready-to-run pose, exemplified exactly what Sega was looking for. Now, can you guess what drawing came second in that contest? It was an egg-shaped man with a mustache. Poor Dr. Robotnik still losing out to that pesky hedgehog.
I hate that hedgehog!
Can you imagine how close we were to an alternative reality where Eggman sped across the landscape to defeat the evil Dr. Hedgehog, subjugating his fellow animal friends? Okay, well, I guess we can see why that didn't pan out. Once Sega landed on a main character design, they reworked many of the already existing visuals to match him, and eventually history would be made when the completed game went to market. In a rare twist though, Sonic the Hedgehog was first released in the UK on June 21st, 1991. The North American release followed 2 days later on June 23rd, and then it took another month before Japan and the PAL regions got the game. Regardless though, in 1991, the world got to speed along with Sonic the Hedgehog, and they all loved it. Now, I'll show you why. Dr. Robotnik, also known as Dr. Eggman in Japan, is on the hunt for the legendary Chaos Emeralds on South Island. In doing so, he also captures and traps the inhabitants into aggressive robots that do the Doctor's bidding. It's up to Sonic the Hedgehog to rescue the locals, beat Robotnik to the emeralds, and repel the mad scientist away. When you power on the game, you get that ever-iconic Sega! Shortly followed by a simple title credit of the in-house team that made the game, Sonic Team. We're then treated to a highly appealing title screen where Sonic pops out of the game logo and strikes one of his many iconic poses. Meanwhile, the lush, distant background of the first level pans across the horizon, and the game's title track plays. And in matching with the theme of speed, the title screen and song only last 8 seconds before it heads immediately into a demo of the first level. Once you press start, the game directly goes into the first level, just like it did in the demo. You're put right into the action. With the focus on speed, Sega elected to keep controls simple and let the levels and gameplay do the heavy lifting. You, of course, move Sonic using the directional pad, and despite the Genesis controller offering 3 buttons, you only needed to use 1 button that allowed you to both jump and attack. See, when Sonic jumps, he does so curled up in a ball, and he's able to damage enemies from any direction. Some enemies, however, will have armored or spiky sides to them, so you have to pay attention if they're hittable or not. Other damaging obstacles include spikes, lava, and instant death pitfalls. When moving Sonic around, he's not immediately fast, as that would make life on a platforming game a headache. Rather, he accelerates from a slower speed that's more suitable for platform jumping. But there are also many devices littered around the stages that can give him an instant speed boost to maximum. Racing at top speed can feel a bit dangerous as you don't know what's coming, and Sonic could run into an enemy. However, that's where his spin attack comes into play. By pressing down on the D-pad while running, allows Sonic to curl up and become a moving ball of doom to his enemies. This also allows gravity to take over, and Sonic has the potential to go even faster, but without controlling any acceleration. With all the fast movements, collisions, and direction changes in this game, it was a technical feat that the game had no lag and was able to keep up with 100% of the action, all thanks to an algorithm created by programmer Yuji Naka. Not once did I encounter slowdown or Sonic running off screen to his doom. Speedy as Sonic is, he's also a bit squishy. One hit can result in a loss of life. However, he gets some armor by collecting the floating rings littered around the entire game. If he has even one ring on him, he can take a hit and keep on going, but he'll lose all his rings as he does. Thankfully, some of them will bounce around and you get a chance to recollect them. There's also a power-up item that shields him from a hit as well, but it's a one-and-done thing once he's hit. Other power-ups include sets of 10 rings, power sneakers that temporarily increase Sonic's movement speed, 1-ups with Sonic's face on it, and an invincibility power that lasts for a short period of time. You gotta be careful with that last one though, because a pitfall can still kill you even though you're invincible. The goal of the game is to reach and destroy Dr. Robotnik's base at the end of 6 zones, all with 3 acts each. At the end of every Act 3, you square off against the mad scientist himself, and defeating him allows Sonic to rescue a mass amount of wildlife. At the end of every Act 1 and 2, if you have at least 50 rings, you'll have a chance to enter a big warp ring at the end of the stage. This will take you to the special stage, where you can collect Chaos Emeralds. The special stage is a spinning cage with obstacles and variable changers. Some blocks you hit may reverse the rotation of the stage, others will speed up or down the rotation speed, and the ones you want to really avoid are the ones labeled Goal, as those will eject you from the stage. Somewhere in the chaos lies an emerald that you have to Sonic spin your way through destructible blocks to obtain. Here, you also have the chance to gain a full continue if you want some insurance against a game over. You even get to continue from the same act instead of getting thrown all the way back to Act 1 of the current zone. It's the same now as it was in the 90s. The game is just fun to play. All the action remains smooth, and Sonic's controls are tight and responsive. The stage puzzles are a good amount of difficulty and length, but they don't break the stage's action, which is good because you only get 10 minutes to beat each act before you get instantly knocked out. To be fair though, you won't ever really come close to that at all, as each act isn't very long. If you've played any of the other Sonic games, you'll probably notice that this one is a bit more platforming heavy than speed focused compared to the later entries. This really had no bearing on how fun this game is though. There's still a sense of speed and fun here. Now, where there could be some criticism is some of the programming quirks. I got killed a couple of times from getting crushed by moving platforms, except it was when the gap was opening up, not closing, which means the instant death variable never shut off. Also, this game's spikes are super unforgiving. If you get hit by an enemy into spikes, you don't get those split seconds of iframes to recover. It's an immediate kill. That said, and I kid you not, that's literally the only bad things I have to say about this game. Replaying it today, I'm reminded of its solid gameplay and further appreciate the programming and level design choices. The gameplay of Sonic the Hedgehog gets a 10 out of 10. Opening up your game with a totally off-white screen wouldn't have been my first choice, but then again, it's just iconic now when that Sega logo wipes in. The dev team also elected to keep their title credit nice and simple so that the game itself would shine from the get-go. For the 8 seconds it's displayed, the title screen tells you everything you need to know about what sort of aesthetic you're in for. Sonic's attitude is in full display as he wags his finger, while the lush background of Green Hill Zone pans on by. And who needs a menu? We're going right into the action straight from the title screen. Speaking of Green Hill Zone, the vibrant and inviting colors of Sonic's most iconic stage pop out on the screen, along with the checkerboard pattern ground? The devs have said that they were inspired by the pattern that would appear on many 3D programs at the time, used to identify all the different angles of the 3D space. Here, in Sonic the Hedgehog, it helped them create a sense of depth while filling dead graphical space. Then, we move on to the Marble Zone, starting off bright on the surface, but once you drop into the depths, the environment becomes darker and more cramped. Thing is though, the actual color palette of the foreground is not that dark, it's just purple. Somehow our brains read that as dark, but our eyes are still able to easily process it. Coupled with the darker background, the colors still pop nicely. In the next area, the Spring Yard Zone, it takes on more of a copper theme, both the bronzed and the oxidized versions. To offset the old world feel though, some muted neon lights are peppered around the stage. And, as the name would suggest, yes, there's tons of springs here, ready to fling you into any which way direction. Anyone who's used to casino-style stages in a Sonic game can definitely look at Spring Yard and say it was the progenitor of those stages. When starting in the Labyrinth Zone, you're surrounded by sandstone colors and ancient-looking designs. Having to work around the combination of old-style spike traps and Robotnik's robot baddies would seem challenge enough. But then, we added in the dreaded water. Major parts of the zone are underwater, and suddenly being surrounded by the teal hue on top of the sandstone brown probably would have anyone gasping for air, especially since Sonic himself can't swim, and he has a limited amount of time that he could spend underwater. Thankfully, they peppered around a lot of air pocket bubbles that Sonic can obtain more oxygen from. Sega's masterful color selection still makes the environments not feel too imposing. Now, I always found it funny that while South Island is meant to be a tropical place with cute animals, we then get environments like in Starlight Zone. It's literally a construction zone with metal girders in the foreground and brick walls in the background. I would question it further if story really was all that important in a game like this, but it's not. The juxtaposition of the green copper and steel against the dark red bricks and dark skyscrapers in the background made for an interesting and unique look to this stage. And then, you finally make it to Dr. Robotnik's base of operations, the Scrap Brain Zone. Here, it's all steel, steel, steel grays and cold industrial design. One could see the visuals here as being Sonic's most lackluster in all of the games, but remember that this was done on purpose to juxtapose South Island's lush nature to Robotnik's cold and soulless steel designs. Also, this zone does something that none of the other zones in this game did. The background changed between acts. Act 1 was clearly outside in a desolate but tower-filled industrial park, while Act 2 shows Sonic breaching into Robotnik's domain. However, come Act 3, the mad scientist traps and drops Sonic down into a gray version of the Labyrinth Zone that he has to get himself out of. Simple as it may be, the visuals do tell a sense of a story for Sonic's journey. Even the spastic design of the special stage tells you something, like the Chaos Emeralds had to be hidden in pockets of space that kept the unworthy out, or some such story like that. But seriously, what kind of fever dream did the designer of this stage have to come up with this? Now, let's talk about the main man himself here. Of course, they came up with his color scheme first, so all the backgrounds had to make sure he'd stand out. The sheer number of pixels available allowed the artist to put in what I think is 5 levels of shading on Sonic, so even overlapping a blue in the background, he'd still stand out well. His sprite size was a perfect balance of big enough to be detailed, but small enough to allow the player to see all around Sonic enough to react to threats or platforms. That last part, of course, is super important to avoid issues with the speedy parts of the game. All the bad guy robots were also well detailed and stood out just as much as Sonic. And as short of a time as we see Robotnik, he gets a lot of detail love too on him and his egg pod. Both main characters have some great poses and motions that add to their attitudes just to further exude charm to last decades. There is, however, some graphical boredom when it comes to a lot of the traps in the game. When you take a good look at them, they look pretty plain and clearly didn't have as much attention paid to them. Now, this isn't every trap, as some look amazing, like the lava in Marble Zone for example, but then it makes the others like spike balls and seesaws stand out, and clearly it's not really too obvious if it was on purpose or not. Ah well, once again, that's a minor gripe in the grand scheme of the game. The game just looks great, and more impressive considering the Genesis's graphical display capacity was a quarter of the competition's. It forced Sonic Team to be very specific in their color choices, and in the end, they ended up with a lush, colorful, and sharp product. The graphics of Sonic the Hedgehog get a 10 out of 10. I said it before and I'll say it again. You can't beat a good Sega intro. Turns out, Sega had been using that exact same jingle since it debuted in a 1983 television commercial for their SG-1000 home console. Sonic the Hedgehog marked the first time it was used in a video game, but it almost didn't happen. Yuji Naka had planned to add a sound test to the game, but time constraints forced him to scrap it, and thus he decided to fill the extra data space with the jingle and intro. So you know you got a good tune in the Sonic title song when 8 seconds was all it took to get that earworm buried into your skull. It probably helped that the game uses it for the invincibility theme and a version of it for the game over theme, as well as Sega using it a lot in marketing, future games, and spin-offs. Regardless, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't instantly recognize where the song comes from. After listening to the tracks of Sonic the Hedgehog, you would think the composer had a solid grasp on the popular music stylings of the 90s. And you would be right. Creating a franchise that would rival Mario meant not only making the gameplay solid and the visuals eye-popping, but also catching the attention of the players' ears. To compose the soundtrack, Sonic chose Masato Nakamura, who was, and still is, a member of the J-pop band Dreams Come True. Sonic the Hedgehog was aiming to come blasting out of the gates with pop culture in tow, and it sure seemed to work, as Green Hill Zone's music has been replayed, remastered, remixed, and remade so many times over the decades, it is that iconic. The energy matches the vibrant environment, keeping things light and fun to match the quirky world. And yet, in a near tonal shift, Marble Zone's music takes a darker, more epic tone, but still not so serious. There's major vibes of adventuring through ruins of an ancient civilization that Sega really didn't pursue much further, until a later entry, that is. Moving on to the Spring Yard Zone, we're back to the fun and hip tunes. Compared to Green Hill Zone, this one maybe has less of a whimsy and more of a let's have a fun time vibes. The level has an air of a casino, so why not also the music? It's this song too that you can feel Sonic's connection to the 90s pop music scene, and of course start showing off more of Nakamura's pop stylings. The whimsy comes back in a surprising way with the Labyrinth Zone's stage tune. It's poppy, but medium energy, perfect for introducing the game's slower water-based gaming. Now, getting into the Starlight Zone, I think there may have been a miscue between the devs and Nakamura. The song is light, airy, and cute in a way, but I'm not sure how a cityscape construction zone sprung those words to mind. But this is what we ended up with. The song by no means is bad. It's quirky, in fact, but it just doesn't seem to fit the visuals of the zone, as far as I'm concerned. Scrap Brain Zone's music also falls a bit short for me. It certainly starts off well and thematic for the area, but halfway through switches to something too lighthearted than I think the area should have. Just kinda takes you out of it for a bit. I also feel like the first 4 zones being so good kind of set up the final 2 to fail in my ears, unfortunately. And we can't talk Sonic music without touching on boss music. While I would say Robotnik's themes in this game are definitely not his best, they do match the energy. Boss fights in this game were more platformer puzzler style than what future entries would give you, so there was no need for a high-octane beat. It in fact gave more epic vibes like it was the final fight, where the Doctor would just keep coming back for more. The sound effects of this game match that of the visuals. Sharp. Not in a bad way, mind you. They aren't going to vibrate your eardrums into oblivion. Rather, you're guaranteed to hear every single sound clearly to keep you aware of the action going on around you. However, the Scrap Brain Zone's plethora of traps might make you turn down the sound a bit. That zone can get pretty overbearing with all the trap sounds firing off continuously. But let's not forget the iconic sound of Sonic collecting rings. This, along with just about every other sound effect in the game, have persisted through future entries. They all just worked, so why change them? There was always a situation where they could fit, whether it was game-wide or just a one-off on a stage somewhere. The music and sound of Sonic the Hedgehog gets a 9 out of 10. As big of a Sonic fan as I am now, one would be surprised to find out that I never actually owned a Genesis until something like 1995. That's right, folks, gasp and shock that I was a Team Mario kid. But that certainly didn't stop me from playing other kids' consoles though. I have very fond memories of going over to a cousin's house who owned a Genesis and of course Sonic the Hedgehog. Many times the console would be the center of attention for the kids, and other times it would be the Super Nintendo that I brought over. On the days that the kids would take to the Nintendo console, the Genesis would be tucked into a corner on a small TV all plugged in and ready to play. So, as I was generous enough to let others play with the Super Nintendo, I would sneak off and give that Sega Hedgehog thing a try. This happened a lot, but being in a party, I didn't really have a lot of time to focus to make much of a dent in the game. I wasn't really that good anyways. On average, the best I could do was make it to the Marble Zone Act 2, where just one jump in particular would always get me. Did I keep coming back for more? Oh, you know I did. There were even a handful of times I made it to the Labyrinth Zone. But wait, does this mean I actually ever made it past the Labyrinth Zone at all? No. In fact, it was for this review's gameplay footage that for the first time in 35 years, I finally made it as far as the final zone, only to succumb to a random spike ball robot though. Also, there was a time in the early 2000s that a website dedicated to hosting remixes of video game music came around, called Overclocked Remix. Sonic music had the highest count of remixes at the time, and some of them were real bangers. I listened to a lot of them, and of course, quite a few came from this game. The nostalgia hit gets a 9 out of 10. After 35 years of reinventing gameplay, designs, and adding a plethora of characters to interact with, two things have remained nearly consistent in the franchise: the focus on speed gameplay, along with Sonic's attitude, both going hand in hand and forming the core of what Sonic the Hedgehog is. Right from before Sonic's conception, he was destined to become the flagship character to hawk Sega products as effectively or better than Nintendo's Mario. And at one point, the competition was neck and neck, with multiple leads getting overtaken. It's just a shame that the Sonic speed momentum came to a screeching halt around the Sega Saturn era, very much due to major mismanagement of what made Sonic and Sega stand out in the Genesis era. Then again, while Sonic games were getting left behind, the blue blur would make headway in other mediums like television shows and comics, and would eventually spawn an online fandom where fans would go so far as to create their own original characters to insert to Sonic stories, whether they be canon or their own basis as a starting point. Now, I use the term original quite loosely here, because a majority of these Sonic OCs would be something like, this is, speed synonym, the Hedgehog. They're super fast, but are totally different from Sonic because they are, pick a color besides blue. You might think I'm kidding, but no, it really was like that. Just ask my Sonic OC, Tony the Hedgehog. Okay, no, I didn't add the Hedgehog, but the core really did start that way. Even outside the Sonic fandom, the franchise also inspired a lot of other somewhat copycat characters. The likes of Bubsy Bobcat, Earthworm Jim, Aero the Acrobat, and even Crash Bandicoot were created to capture the anthro character with attitude craze that started with Sonic. With the Sonic franchise being so saturated with content after 3.5 decades, it was nice to go back to a simpler time where he was just a creature trying to stop a mad scientist. And that was it. The gameplay was pure and not bloated, with a singular vision of how the title character operates. And it's still holding up well today, with its bright and vivid visuals, killer classic soundtrack, and fun gameplay. Sonic the Hedgehog on Sega Genesis is a historic entry to video games that is just way past cool today as it was in the 90s.